The photograph was found in the glove compartment of a bullet-riddled Ford Model A, abandoned off Route 66 just outside Oklahoma City. A woman laughing, her hands wrapped around a Winchester Model 1897 shotgun. A man beside her. Behind them, a flat field of dust and winter trees. It looked like mischief, not murder. But the sheriff who picked up that photograph in the spring of 1933 did not see a joke. He saw two names that had turned the Midwest inside out. Evelyn Hart and Royce "Red" Dalton. They were once ordinary people, the kind who paid their bills late and prayed for rain. But by the time that photo was taken, they had become something else entirely. Symbols of a country on its knees, when banks were enemies and bullets were cheaper than bread. Their story did not begin with greed. It began with hunger. In the fall of 1930, Kansas City was choking under the weight of the Great Depression. Men lined up for factory jobs that no longer existed. Women bartered jewelry for flour. Royce Dalton, 26, worked as a mechanic for a trucking company that went bankrupt overnight. One morning, he walked to work and found the gates locked. A sign hanging from the door that read, "Closed until further notice." That notice never came. Evelyn Hart, 22, worked at a roadside diner 2 miles down the same highway. Her customers were truckers, traveling salesmen, and farmers with more stories than coins. She had served coffee for hours just to earn a nickel tip. At night, she had count the coins under her pillow and wonder how long before the bank foreclosed on her parents' farm. They met one rainy afternoon when Royce came in looking for shelter and ended up helping Evelyn fix a flickering light behind the counter. He was quiet, polite, and broke. She was tired, kind, and equally broke. The world outside had stopped caring about people like them, and somehow that made them care about each other more. By winter, their lives had folded into each other like pages of the same book. Royce repaired broken engines for food. Evelyn snuck bread from the diner to share with him. They spoke often about leaving Kansas, about heading south, maybe Texas, where jobs were said to be waiting. But they never made it that far. It started small, a gas station in Sedgwick County. The owner had refused to extend credit, mocking Royce for being another depression bum. Royce came back that night, desperate, holding an old revolver. He did not plan to fire it, but panic makes fools of good men. The cashier fought back. A shot rang out. No one died, but the register was gone by morning. When Evelyn found out, she did not scream or cry. She just asked, "Did you get enough to leave?" He had not. Their first crime did not make the papers. Their second did. In February 1932, they robbed a grocery store outside Topeka. A deputy was shot in the leg. That's when newspapers found their story. "Sweetheart Bandits strike again." The nickname stuck like tar. Within months, they were blamed for every robbery across 3 states, most of which they had not committed. But fame is a strange thing. Once you are named a criminal, you start living like one. They bought a used Ford Model A and learned how to drive all night without headlights. Evelyn cut her hair short, tied it under a beret, and started carrying Royce's spare revolver. People called her the girl with the Thompson, that same gun she held in the photograph. By early 1933, the country had made them into symbols, rebels against a broken system. Newspapers painted them as folk heroes, young lovers defying the law, though their days were nothing like the headlines. They slept in barns, washed in rivers, and trusted no one. Evelyn wrote in her notebook, "They call us dangerous because it's easier than calling us desperate." The photograph, the one the sheriff found, was taken that spring near the Red River by a drifter named Cal Hensley. He said Evelyn wanted something to remember the laughter. They did not know it yet, but that photograph would outlive them both, because long after their names vanished, America would remember that image, a moment of reckless joy on the edge of ruin. And the story behind it was not about love or rebellion. It was about 2 forgotten souls who learned the hard way that, in 1933, the only thing more dangerous than a gun was becoming a legend. By the summer of 1933, the roads of the Midwest were burning with rumors. Truckers swapped stories about the Sweetheart Bandits, swearing they had seen their black Ford darting through back roads at night. Gas station clerks claimed a polite young couple had paid in crisp bills only for the register to come up short after they left. Even bank tellers whispered their names like campfire ghosts, Evelyn Hart and Royce Dalton. What most people did not know was that their luck was running on fumes. The Ford had broken down outside Tulsa, its tires worn bald from months of fleeing. They hid it behind an abandoned grain silo, sleeping inside for 3 nights while Royce worked by lantern light to patch the radiator. Evelyn kept watch with the Thompson on her lap, writing in her notebook between drags of a cigarette. She was always writing lists, thoughts, fragments of dreams she knew would never happen. "We ain't bad people," she wrote once. "We just ran out of choices before anyone cared to look. But the choices they made, next, would bury them deeper than either could imagine." In early August, Royce heard about a cash transfer at the Mid-State Bank in Ponca City. It was supposed to be routine, small-town bank, minimal guards, easy in and out. He told Evelyn it would be their last job. "Just enough to get clear of the newspapers," he said. "We take it, we disappear." They arrived at dawn in a stolen pickup, dressed like traveling farmhands. Inside, the bank was nearly empty, a teller, a clerk, and one armed guard sipping coffee. Everything went smooth until the vault door jammed. Royce cursed under his breath. The clerk panicked and ran for the alarm. Evelyn shouted for him to stop. The guard turned, hand on his pistol. 2 shots, 1 scream, then silence. When the smoke cleared, the guard was on the floor, blood on the tiles, the teller sobbing, and Evelyn trembling, clutching the Thompson like it might erase what had just happened. They took what they could carry, just over $2,000, and fled south before the town even woke. It was not supposed to go like that. They had robbed before, but never taken a life. Royce tried to speak, to comfort her, but Evelyn would not look at him. She stared out the window, wind whipping her hair, the world outside blurring into colorless motion. That night, she burned her notebook. Within a week, their faces were on every post office wall between Oklahoma and Arkansas. "Armed and dangerous," the posters warned. Rewards rose to $1,500 more than most men made in a year. Radio stations carried their names. The Kansas City Star ran a headline, "Killer Sweethearts Strike Again." But what the papers did not print was the truth. They were starving, hunted, running on fear and fumes. Every meal was stolen or traded. Royce grew thinner by the day, and Evelyn stopped sleeping altogether. They could not risk hospitals or towns. Every road sign became a threat. Every passing car a hunter. In those weeks, something inside Evelyn hardened. She stopped asking when it would end. She stopped writing in her journal. Royce noticed it in her eyes, that look of distance, like she was already halfway gone. Yet she stayed, not out of love, but loyalty. One cold evening, near the Texas border, they found refuge in an abandoned farmhouse. The air smelled of dust and oil. Royce tinkered with the Thompson, cleaning it with care, while Evelyn sat by the window, watching the road. For a brief moment, the world was still. "Do you ever think they'll forget us?" she asked softly. Royce did not look up. "Not if they find that picture." She smiled faintly. "Good." Outside, the last light of day slipped over the fields, quiet, endless, and heavy with the weight of history. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of an approaching engine echoed through the dark. By morning, they were gone again. Another town, another false name, another story waiting to be written in blood and headlines, because the truth was Evelyn Hart and Royce Dalton were no longer running from the law. They were running from the myth they had become. And myths, once born, never die quietly. By late September of 1933, the Sweetheart Bandits had become less like fugitives and more like ghosts drifting from one dying town to the next, always a day ahead of the law and a heartbeat away from disaster. Every farm they passed told the same story: empty barns, dried wells, hungry children. The whole country was starving. But in the papers, Evelyn and Royce were the villains who had stolen the nation's last bit of sympathy. They crossed into Texas under false names, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They rented a room above a boarded-up hardware store in Wichita Falls. The landlady, Mrs. Dobbins, was half blind and twice as kind, grateful for anyone who paid cash. For the first time in months, they slept in real beds, with sheets that smelled faintly of soap instead of smoke. Royce tried to fix an old radio in the corner, hoping to hear news. Evelyn just stared at the window, whispering, "It feels wrong to be still." But stillness was dangerous. Every day that passed without movement tightened the circle around them. Royce had started meeting with an old friend, Leonard Pike, a mechanic who ran a small garage outside of town. They had known each other before the Depression, before the robberies, before the blood. Leonard promised him an escape, forged papers, new plates, and a truck headed west. It would cost $300, all they had left. Evelyn did not trust him. "Men don't help outlaws for charity," she warned. Royce brushed it off. "He's just trying to get by like us." What neither of them knew was that Leonard had already sold their names to a federal agent from Dallas. The Bureau had been desperate to make a name after the embarrassment of failing to catch other gang outfits, Dillinger, Barrow, the Barkers. A young agent named Harold Crane saw Evelyn and Royce as his chance at glory. Leonard would get $500 and immunity for his own theft charges. All he had to do was keep them still long enough. On the evening of October 5th, Leonard brought a jug of whiskey to the garage and told Royce the papers would be ready by morning. Evelyn stayed back in the truck, the Thompson resting on her lap. She did not drink, did not talk. She just watched the lights of the gas pumps flicker in the dark. The silence between them was heavier than any gunmetal. Around midnight, Royce returned to the rented room, a little drunk but smiling for the first time in weeks. "Tomorrow, Evie, we head for California. Fresh start." She smiled too, not because she believed him, but because she wanted to remember that face. The one before the fall. At dawn, the sound of tires on gravel woke her. Trucks, several of them. Then came the crunch of boots on the stairs. The bark of orders shouted in low, practiced tones. "Federal Bureau. Nobody move." Evelyn's hand went for the Thompson. Bullets ripped through the walls before she could breathe. The window exploded. Royce stumbled from the bed, yelling her name, pulling her toward the back. The hallway filled with gunfire and smoke. She fired blind through the door, 3 short bursts that silenced the shouting outside. But it was no use. They were surrounded. Royce turned toward her, blood on his shoulder. "Go through the window. I'm not leaving you." He forced the revolver into her hand. "You already have." Then he kicked open the back door and ran for the alley, a final distraction. Evelyn followed seconds later, sprinting barefoot through the mud and glass, her heart a drumbeat of terror and disbelief. Behind her, she heard the sound not of one gunshot, but many, then nothing. She hid beneath a freight train half a mile away, shaking, breathless. The Thompson gone, Royce gone, everything gone. By sunrise, the Bureau announced victory. Public enemy couple ends in shootout. Man dead, woman at large. But the truth was quieter. Royce Dalton had not died in the street. He had bled out in the arms of a local preacher who later said he looked more tired than sinful. And Evelyn Hart? She disappeared. The newspapers claimed she fled to Mexico. Others swore she drowned in the Red River. But no body was ever found. For weeks, the nation feasted on the story, the fallen lovers, the last stand, the smile behind the Thompson. But one piece of the truth never made the headlines. Inside the abandoned room in Wichita Falls, among the shattered glass and blood-stained sheets, Sheriff Crane found something tucked under the mattress, a torn page from Evelyn's burnt notebook. It read, "They will write our story without knowing our hunger. They will call us killers because it makes them feel clean. But all we ever wanted was enough to live without begging." That page would later appear in a small museum in Oklahoma City, displayed beside the famous photograph. To the public, it was the end of a legend. But to those who looked closely, it was something else, a reminder that even in a country drowning in despair, the line between survival and sin was as thin as the paper her words were written on. Winter came early that year. A dry, bitter cold swept through northern Texas, covering the fields with a thin frost that glittered under the pale sun. In December of 1933, the newspapers had already buried the story of Evelyn Hart beneath newer headlines: bank failures, dust storms, Roosevelt speeches. America had moved on, but the Bureau had not. Agent Harold Crane was promoted for bringing down the Sweetheart Bandits, though privately he knew his victory was incomplete. Royce Dalton's body had been found, identified, buried under government watch, but Evelyn, she had simply vanished. No witnesses, no trail, no proof, just blood on the floor, and the echo of her laughter in that cursed photograph. For months, Crane told himself she was dead. The Red River would have swallowed her up by now. But late that winter, He received a letter from a sheriff in northern Louisiana. The note was brief, written in shaky hand. A woman came through last week. Short hair, scar on her shoulder, paid in 20s marked from Ponca City. Said her name was Eve Carter. Crane read the note 3 times before lighting a cigarette and staring out his office window. He did not say a word to his men. He did not file a report. He just packed a small case and boarded a train south. "I may know," is the tone of the tone. 200 miles away, in a small town called Ruston, Evelyn Hart was alive, but she was no longer the woman from the photograph. Her once laughing eyes had dimmed into something harder, sharper. Her hair was cut uneven, her clothes borrowed from strangers. She worked nights in a roadside diner under the name Anna Carter, washing dishes until her hands cracked from the cold. The townsfolk thought she was a widow from Oklahoma, quiet and polite. They liked her pie, her silence, and her smile that never reached her eyes. Nobody asked questions, not in those years. Everyone was running from something. Every evening, after closing, she had sit behind the diner and smoke a single cigarette, staring toward the dark woods behind the road. Sometimes she had take out an old photograph, folded, worn, its corners burned, showing a man beside her, smiling faintly with one hand lifted in mock surrender. She would trace his face with her thumb, whispering something only the wind could hear. Then she had tucked it away before the tears came. She was not hiding from justice anymore. She was hiding from memory. But memory, like hunger, does not stay buried long. One cold night, a truck pulled up to the diner long after closing. 2 men stepped out, one tall and thin, the other broad-shouldered and silent. They ordered coffee. The tall one spoke first, polite but offbeat, like a man rehearsing a part. "You're new around here, ma'am?" "Been here a while," she said without looking up. "Funny. Folks say you came from Oklahoma. Around Wichita Falls, maybe?" Her hand froze mid-pour. The coffee overflowed the cup. The tall man smiled and leaned forward. "I knew a girl there once. Short hair, carried a Thompson." The room went still. Evelyn did not breathe. The clock ticked like a trigger. Then she said quietly, "You must have the wrong girl." The man's smile did not fade. He placed a silver badge on the counter. "Maybe, but I make a living finding the right ones." Crane. Evelyn dropped the coffee pot glass, shattering across the floor. She ran before he could stand out the back door, into the cold. He shouted her name, "Evelyn," but she did not look back. The sound of boots followed her through the mud and trees until the gunshot cracked the night. The bullet caught her side. She stumbled but did not fall. The woods swallowed her whole. Crane searched until sunrise, following blood through the frost, but found nothing except her photograph in the snow, the same one from the Ford, folded small enough to fit in a coat pocket. He called off the search 2 days later. "She's dead," he told his men. "Let her ghost rest." But in January of 1934, a freight conductor reported seeing a woman boarding a train near Shreveport alone, limping, clutching her side. She paid in 20s, smiled faintly, and disappeared into the cars headed east. Some said she died that winter, bleeding out somewhere in the Carolina woods. Others swore they saw her years later, a waitress in Tennessee, a seamstress in Alabama, even a drifter in Chicago who never gave her name but carried a photograph she never let go of. And maybe that's how Evelyn Hart wanted it to fade into myth. Neither saint nor sinner, just another soul lost to the hunger of her time. Because in the end, it was not the law that killed the Sweetheart Bandits. It was America itself, a country too broken to forgive the people it had driven to the edge. And somewhere, between the smoke and the silence, a woman who would not die kept walking, her story written not in headlines, but in whispers. By the time 1939 came, the Great Depression had loosened its grip on America, but the scars it left never healed. New factories rose, men found work again, and the nation began to look east toward another storm brewing in Europe. People forgot many things from that lost decade. The hunger, the dust, the desperation. But in a small museum in Oklahoma City, there hung a photograph that refused to let them forget. A woman, laughing, a man, smiling faintly beside her. Behind them, a field of bare winter trees. The caption read, "Evelyn Hart and Royce Dalton, the Sweetheart Bandits, 1933. Tourists would stop to stare, whispering to their children about how love and crime once shared the same breath. Some called it tragic, others romantic. But one man who visited the museum that summer did not say a word. He just stood there, hat in hand, staring at the photograph as though it might start speaking to him. Agent Harold Crane was no longer young. His hair had gone grey at the temples, and the bureau had long moved on from his era. But he had never stopped thinking about her, the girl who vanished into the woods, the one who should have died but never quite did. He had chased hundreds of fugitives after that, yet none haunted him the way Evelyn Hart did, not because she escaped justice, but because he never truly knew what justice meant for someone like her. That night, Crane took a room at a boarding house near the edge of town. He could not sleep. The photograph had stirred something he thought long buried. Around midnight, he walked out onto the street, coat pulled tight against the cold, and stopped by a corner cafe that was still open. Inside, an old woman was wiping tables. Her movements were slow but steady, her face thin, her eyes pale. She looked up when he entered. "Evening," she said softly. "Kitchen's closed, but I can make you coffee." "That'd be fine," Crane said, taking a seat near the window. When she brought the cup, their eyes met for a moment, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. Her voice, her hands, even the small scar beneath her collarbone. He knew that face. Older, quieter, but it was her, Evelyn Hart. Crane did not reach for his badge. He did not draw his gun. He just sat there, holding the cup between his palms. "It's been a long time," he said finally. The woman smiled faintly. "Longer than you think. They said you died." She looked out the window. "Maybe I did." They sat in silence for a while. The radio behind the counter hummed a slow tune, Glenn Miller, Moonlight Serenade. The world had changed, but for that brief moment, they were still back in 1933, the air thick with smoke and sorrow. Crane broke the silence first. "You could have run again. Why stay?" Evelyn's voice was calm. "I've been running my whole life. Thought maybe it was time to let the world forget." "You've been working here long?" 15 years. He nodded. "You ever think about turning yourself in?" She smiled, just barely. "To who? The law that made me? Or the country that forgot me?" Crane did not answer. He finished his coffee, placed $1 on the counter, and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "You could have been anything, Evelyn. You know that?" She looked up at him. "I was what the times allowed." He gave a small nod and walked into the night. The bell above the door jingled once, and then it was quiet again. Evelyn stood there for a moment, then turned the sign to closed and disappeared into the back room. The next morning, when the cafe owner came in, she found the old woman's apron neatly folded on the counter along with a photograph, the same one from the museum. But this one was different. On the back, written in faded ink, were 6 words. "Tell them we were only hungry." The museum would later receive that photograph anonymously, postmarked from Chicago. No one ever saw Evelyn Hart again. Some say she died soon after, buried in an unmarked grave somewhere near the Great Lakes. Others claim she lived quietly into old age, moving from town to town until the world no longer remembered her name. But the photograph endured, passed through hands, studied by historians, admired by romantics, misunderstood by all. Decades later, a journalist wrote an article about the image, calling it the last smile of the Great Depression. But those who looked closer saw something else, not defiance, not joy, but the fragile peace of 2 people who had lost everything except each other. In the end, the story of Evelyn Hart and Royce Dalton was not about crime or rebellion. It was about survival and the quiet tragedy of those the world left behind. And somewhere, perhaps in the faintest corner of memory, their laughter still lingers, not as a legend, but as a warning of what becomes of good people when hunger outlives hope.